So 2.5 covers this idea. And again, here, if you look at your first page, here's a perfect chart of kind of my summary. Is again, your symbols, what you had before, what you have now, and what it means. Is, if we have the equal to's, before we used a closed circle, now we're using brackets, and that means you're including the value in your graph. And now if you have less than or greater than, before we used to use open circles, now we're going to use parentheses, and that means you're not including the value. And again, we're doing this because we want to talk about something new. We're talking about this interval notation. Interval notation is when you have your parentheses, brackets, infinities, that sort of thing. That's what we mean by interval notation. Set builder notation you've actually already done before and probably have already seen it a lot. Set builder notation looks like you get these fancy little set braces. You get a little X, and what that X is it's just telling you what your variable is. You get this line after it that means such that, and then you put whatever your inequality is in here. That's what set builder notation is. It's basically a fancy formal way of writing your answers. So, for our first sets of examples, we want to write some answers in both set builder notation and interval notation. And again, as a quick reminder, the key is always reading your graphs from left to right. That is the most important thing, like all of math. Let's take a look at A. In A, we've already got the graph drawn for something, and we want to rewrite the graph, the solution there, in set builder notation and in interval notation. So let's try. Well, in set builder notation, we're always going to start out with the little set braces, and then whatever variable we want to use, we tend to want to use X. So we'll throw in an X. And we use our little line that means such that. And what this means, I want all the X's such that, and then I need to put in the inequality. Well, we know what kind of inequality we're going to have from the graph. The graph has a 2 in it, so with my X, I'm going to have a 2. Well, notice which way is it pointing? It's pointing to the right, so it should be a greater than symbol. The question is whether or not it should be a greater than or equal to. And what's going to tell me whether or not it's going to be a greater than or equal to is going to be just the parentheses on the graph. Remember, parentheses are the same thing as open circles, which means you're not including the value. Same thing as open circles, so you're not including the value, which means you shouldn't have an equal to. It should just be greater than. So we're going to leave it as just a greater than. Okay, now let's try reading our graph from left to right and put it in interval notation. From left to right, we're starting, if you read your graph from left to right, notice, from left to right, it doesn't even start until you hit the 2. When we hit the 2, let's see, we're starting our graph with a parentheses, and then continuing until we hit, let's see, we're going to continue until we hit the arrow, which means you keep on going forever, which means we've got an infinity. Remember, with infinities, that's our special rule. We always use parentheses with infinities, and that is how we're going to close that one off for our interval notation. And that's it. Let's take a look at B. In B, we have a graph pointing to the left, so let's start with our set builder notation. Just like before, we'll start with our set braces. We'll use the variable X just because it's easy. And we'll do our little such that line. We'll start out with another X and whatever number we've got in our picture, which here is -2. Now, because our graph is pointing to the left, it means we should have a less than symbol. The question is less than or equal to. Well, let's take a look. We had a bracket at the -2. Bracket means, remember, brackets are the same thing as closed circles. So that means we should be including the -2. So it should be an equal to. So it should be x is less than or equal to -2. Now let's do interval notation by reading our graph from left to right. From left to right, we're starting out with an arrow on the left, which means we're going to start out with -infinity. And it keeps on going until we stop at our -2 here, which has a bracket. Our -2 is where we stop our graph with a bracket. However, infinity special, it's going to always have a parentheses. So we got a mix matched parentheses and brackets, but that's okay. That's our answer. On these next two on C and D, I wouldn't ask for the set builder notation. So let's kind of cross that out. What I would ask for, though, is the interval notation, which means, again, reading your graph from left to right. So let's look at C first. Reading your graph from left to right, your graph doesn't even start until you hit 8. Where you have what on your graph? You have a parentheses, which means you are not including. Remember, parentheses is the same thing as an open circle, so you're not including the 8. And it keeps on going until you hit 11, where you have a bracket, which is the same thing as a closed circle, so you're going to include the 11. That's what that bracket means. And that's it. So parentheses 8, 11 bracket, and that's all you need for your interval notation. Let's take a look at the interval notation from D. So D, if we trace our graph from left to right, doesn't even start until you hit -5, where you have your parentheses according to the picture. And you keep on going until your graph ends at -2, where you have another parentheses. So be careful. Remember, these parentheses mean you have open circles at -5 and -2, which means you're not including -5 and you're not including -2. But you are including everything in between. Last one here. Reading your graph from left to right. On left, you start with an arrow pointing to the left, and on the right, you end up with an arrow pointing to the right. Well, for our interval notation, will that mean you're starting out with an arrow on the left, which is -infinity? And on the right, you're ending with another arrow, which is +infinity, which means for your interval notation, you're going from -infinity to +infinity, which those, remember, are special cases. They both have parentheses because they're infinities. Set builder notation is not pretty for these. It looks funny. It's just X with our little such set line. And there's no good way to say this. This means X could be any number. So we're just going to say X is a real number. Any real number works. So we'll just say X is a real number. There's no nice way to put that.